There are a few difference-making tight ends in dynasty fantasy football, but if you don't get one of those guys, the depth of the tight end landscape right now still makes it a great position to go after in your leagues, whether it be in trades or in a startup. Today, Jeff Bell and I, we took our tight end rankings, we combined them together, and we are going to break them up into tiers, discussing every single tight end that you should know about in dynasty fantasy football. Jeff, we've got a tier of its own sitting up top. Who is it that we have sitting in tier one all by himself right now?
Well, it's obviously Brock Bowers. You're watching the show, it's Dynasty, you know it. It's Brock Bowers here in the tier by himself. And really, he's a player by himself. And a lot of it's
Yeah.
because he's almost not even a tight end at this point. They kind of have Michael Mayer there, and he missed a portion of last year with some off the field concerns, but they've got Michael Mayer as to be that inline tight end, and they treat Brock Bowers as a slot, as a player that moves all over the field, lines up out of the backfield occasionally. They just created ways to get him the ball in his hands.
I mean, he's a utility player with a tight end designation next to his name, and we've seen this be a very, very good role for other tight ends. I feel like this was early career Travis Kelsey. We would see a lot of jet sweeps and screens and slants to just get the ball in his hands immediately and let him make plays after the catch. And that's exactly what we saw from Brock Bowers his rookie season. Now, I want to talk about Brock Bowers as we get a little bit deeper into the show, too, because there are some other young tight ends that I think people have concerns about. They might not be a unicorn like Brock Bowers, but when you have these young, hyper athletic, big guys that can make plays after the catch, we're seeing that teams are willing to kind of build offenses around these guys. Do we want to talk about Brock Bowers too much, or can we move to the next tier? I think we all know Brock Bowers is in a tier by himself. What he did his rookie season was just unbelievable. How much time do we really need to spend dissecting this one?
If you didn't know, now you know. Brock Bowers, tier by himself.
And I'm guessing tier two, we've got another player by himself. This is going to come as no surprise to anybody. Maybe we should have started from the bottom and worked our way up, kind of like saved the best for the last. But Trey McBride is also in a tier by himself. I mean, this is a guy who did basically nothing as a rookie, and then a year two injury. Well, in his year two, Zach Ertz injury opened up the door for him. He came out and he has just been a superstar ever since, just got a massive contract to stay in Arizona long term. Jeff, when I see a player like this, a guy who for a year and a half straight now has just been a target magnet, a guy who makes plays after the catch, a guy who draws valuable targets deep downfield, this is another guy that, like Brock Bowers, is just kind of in a tier by himself. There aren't many guys out there doing what Trey McBride does, where Brock Bowers is more of this utility player, Swiss Army knife, getting touches out of the backfield and things like that. Trey McBride is your more traditional just pass catcher. He's going to line up in the slot. He's going to line up out wide and inline occasionally, and he's just going to beat his man and make plays downfield. So this is also a very, very valuable player. Can I make the comp maybe that Brock Bowers is like our new George Kittle and Trey McBride is like our new Travis Kelsey? Does that stick with you?
I don't know that I would classify Bowers as a Kittle type player at this point. I mean, Kittle is just an all around tight end, whereas Bowers is just kind of a utility weapon, like you said. I'm curious, Dave. So obviously we've tiered these players differently, and I agree with that. How many more balls did Brock Bowers catch than Trey McBride last year?
I am gonna guess 18.
One. Brock
Really?
Bowers caught one more ball than Trey McBride. He gained 48 more yards than Trey McBride. The
Just
biggest
get
difference
the
between
touchdowns.
touchdowns. It was all the touchdowns, and Trey McBride obviously was threatening the Deontay Johnson record for most receptions without a touchdown in NFL history before he finally broke through and scored a touchdown, and then added a second one on top of that. But I think it's interesting because I think that I don't think that we're wrong in saying that there's a tier difference between the two of them, but I don't think people realize where Trey McBride was in usage and how close he was to. Obviously, Brock Bowers broke those. I think he did get the tight end record, or he was very close to getting Zach Ertz's tight end record if he didn't. But Trey McBride was chasing right after him, and the touchdowns come down to it. But I don't see any reason why that would change. And arguably, Trey McBride, I mean, Kyler Murray's a better quarterback. We don't know exactly what Pete Carroll's offense is going to look like in in Las Vegas, if I get the Raiders correct where they actually play. So we don't know what that offense is going to look like. So, I mean, I don't think it should be shocking if Trey McBride outgains and out targets Brock Bowers this year.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising too that if you look, the Raiders actually ran a lot more passing plays last year than the Cardinals did, which I think people
Yeah.
probably wouldn't expect. But if you look at a target share, the amount of targets from the team that they pulled, which is a little bit more predictive than overall volume, it's kind of crazy. Trey McBride had a 29.3% target share last year. I mean, that's like Puka Nakua, Cooper Cup type of target share. Like he is getting elite usage there. Brock Bowers was number 2 in target share at 25.9%. That's still about a 3% difference. I think the reason that I want Brock Bowers ahead of Trey McBride, though, is that we are comparing a year 3 player to a rookie. So, well, Trey McBride definitely did this and had, better usage and similar performance overall. Doing it as a 25-year-old year 3 player isn't quite as impressive as Brock Bowers doing it as a 22-year-old rookie. So I think that's why we would still lean towards Brock Bowers here,
Yeah.
because you and I both had it the same. Had Bowers atop, Trey McBride number 2. But I think that if you want to put these guys in the same tier, I don't see any issue with that either.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest takeaway. The biggest difference there. I'm started to dig in projections a little bit. The Cardinals were just a very slow paced offense, and they kind of just tried to take the air out of the ball. They didn't throw it around, whereas the Raiders kind of had a revolving door at running back, was kind of looking for an answer there at running back, and so they really had to rely on the pass game. Obviously, had Devontae Adams for a little bit of the season, but leaning that direction to be able to move the ball a little bit more.
All right, next guy. Next tier we want to talk about. We've got a cluster of guys in here, and all guys who are on the right side of the age curve, guys who have shown promise or that we hope will show promise. We got Colson Loveland, T.J. Hawkinson, Tyler Warren, and Sam LaPorta. Now, T.J. Hawkinson is the old man of this group in this tier, but he's still just 27 years old. He'll turn 28 before this season ends. But our friend Andrew Cooper, has done studies on tight end age curves, and we see the peak for tight ends is typically age 28, 29, and then that's when they start their decline. But it's not that sharp fall off like you see with running backs or other positions where a guy turns a certain age and falls off the cliff. What we typically see is a very slow, gradual decline, and that will go into the mid 30s. So I think for a player like TJ Hawkinson, some people in Dynasty are going to see that he's been in the league for a few years. They might start to sour on his name a little bit. I'm still holding it down though. TJ Hawkinson is my tight end 3 overall. You are a little bit lower on him, but I think we both agree that he's in this tier with these other younger guys, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest question for me, not only the age, but what's that offense going to look like with JJ McCarthy? And do we think that
Yeah.
JJ McCarthy, I mean, Sam Darnold played really well last year and surprisingly well. And so do we think JJ McCarthy is going to support that offense in the same level? Because we know Justin Jefferson's going to get his targets, and then Jordan Addison's there obviously as well. We saw TJ Hawkinson come off an injury last year, plug right back in and be very involved in that offense, which is what you want to see. But again, is that going to be a lower ceiling, or is this going to be Kevin O'Connell sprinkles his magic and JJ McCarthy immediately as a rookie is as productive or better than Sam Darnold and elevates that ceiling of that offense?
Yeah, and I think with TJ Hawkinson, we've seen him produce with so many different quarterbacks, whether it was during his time in Detroit or whether it's been in Minnesota with different quarterbacks there. I'm not too concerned. I think when you juxtapose him to a guy like Trey McBride, we talked about Trey McBride running these routes deep downfield and beating his guy. That's never really been TJ Hawkinson's game. He is more of a short field type of guy. You'll see him just kind of sitting there in the flat as the check down option, and that's where he gets so much of his volume. So I don't think he has that game breaking ceiling where he's ever going to be a 1,200 yard, 15 touchdown type of tight end. But I think the volume is going to consistently be there. Last year, we did see a big dip, him coming back off of the ACL, them not having the same level of quarterback play that they got from Kirk Cousins in the past. We obviously have Justin Jefferson now taking 35% of the pie for himself. Jordan Addison is there to carve out a big chunk. But I still think that TJ Hawkinson, he's a guy that historically we've seen him floating around that 25 to 28% target share, dipped a little bit last year, but the usage has consistently been there in this Kevin O'Connell offense. So I'm still very much so in on TJ Hawkinson, especially when I think people start to look at his age and see that he's getting up there a little bit. But there's a lot of other guys that I really like in this tier as well. Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren, the rookies. And then, of course, Sam LaPorta, who we'll get to in a bit. Let's talk about Colson Loveland first, though. You and I both have Colson Loveland as our tight end 4, and then we both have Tyler Warren as our tight end 5. Let's talk about that a little bit because you and I seem to be two of the guys in the industry that are really holding it down for these rookie tight ends. I was on with Steffi Smalls yesterday, and she was asking me, she's like, what is going on in Dynasty rookie drafts where Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren keep falling to me in round 2? Like, why are these guys not top 6, top 7 picks? That's kind of where I'm at. I don't really have an answer for it.
I don't either. I'm happy to take them. I mean, I keep taking them in the end of the first round, beginning of the second round, and I don't know. It surprises me. To me, you're getting too cute when you're putting like an RJ Harvey or a Caleb Johnson above a tight end that went 10th overall in the NFL draft, and it's fascinating that people are doing it because of what we saw with Brock Bowers last year, and especially stack that on top of what we saw with Sam LaPorta. And so it's kind of one of those things of there still seems to be this belief, and it's almost, while we saw a lot of production and record breaking production from Brock Bowers and a great season, record breaking season from Sam LaPorta, it's still kind of like the Kyle Pitts syndrome, I feel like, is still out there, and maybe even a
Yes.
little bit of the Dalton Kincaid syndrome of like, well, we tight ends that go in the first round, they're
Which
never
really, those
good.
are basically that's just OJ Howard syndrome, which is just bleeding over
Yes.
year over year, right?
Yes, and that's, yeah, and David Njoku was a little bit of it at one period
Yeah.
of time, but no, I think that's probably there. It's fascinating because what you're seeing from Brock Bowers, what you're seeing from Trey McBride, to see an offense like the Bears go out and take Colson Loveland at the 10th pick. I mean, I would think Ben Johnson's pretty innovative offensive mind when he's seeing what Brock Bowers and Trey McBride's doing, and he sees Colson Loveland as that type of player that's able to do that. Then that, to me, is a good positive signal. But I mean, I guess crowded targets. I guess Rome Odunze wasn't good last year. I guess some people believe Caleb Johnson or Caleb Williams is not good and at quarterback. And I don't know. I don't have an explanation for it, to be honest with you.
So I will say, Sigmund Bloom did give me an explanation. Not that he's anti Tyler Warren and Colson Loveland by any means, but when I had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, we were talking through the tight end class a little bit, and I talked to him about the draft capital comps. You know, tight ends who have been drafted inside the top 15 over the last 25 years. Jeremy Shockey, Kellen Winslow, Vernon Davis, Eric Ebron, TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, and Brock Bowers. So you look at that list of players, and you can't help but get a little bit excited about Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren. And what Sig pushed back on a little bit is, well, this was a weaker rookie class. So maybe while these guys did go inside the top 15, maybe we should actually be comparing them to the David Njokus and the OJ Howards and the Mike Gesicki's and the Dalton Kincaids and the guys who went more at the end of round 1 because of the weaker class. So I think that's where a lot of people's mindset is, and justifiable. I mean, you can't say that every single rookie class is exactly the same, so draft capital doesn't, but I try to look at a large enough sample that I think you can still draw some decent conclusions there. But I think that is the worry that some people have, is just the weakness of this overall rookie class doesn't mean that these are comparable to other top 15 picks.
And I would say that I think Will Campbell, I think Travis Hunter, I think Abdul Carter would be top 10 picks in almost any other rookie class. And even
Right.
step into, I mean, Ashton Genty is maybe he goes 11th in the deeper class. I don't know. But I think
Right.
there's a gulf between being the 10th overall pick in the draft and going in like 25. And I don't think that there was, as while it was a weaker class, I don't think there was that much talent that was leaked out of this class.
So let's go ahead and talk about the last player that we have in this tier, Sam LaPorta. And this is where you and I have a bit of a disparity. Not huge, but you've got him at 3 overall. I have him at 7 overall. And for me, just get a little bit concerned by the usage. He was 17th in target share last year, which isn't great. That was actually a dip from the 21% target share that he saw as a rookie, which also wasn't that great. So my kind of take last year when looking at Sam LaPorta is this guy was basically giving us low end tight end 1 production and usage, but he scored 10 touchdowns, and that really propped up his fantasy value. Last year, we saw the usage dip a little bit. The touchdowns dried up a bit, and he wasn't the same player he was last year. Now, I get the pro argument for him. Absolutely. He's 24 years old, but now with Ben Johnson being gone, it could be a little bit bleaker for this Detroit offense. I'm a little bit lower on him, still have him in this same tier as you. But basically, what you and I did on this one is we just flip flopped TJ Hawkinson and Sam LaPorta. I'm a bit more bullish on Hawkinson. You're a bit more bullish on LaPorta. Why is it that you're still holding LaPorta up as high as you have him in your rankings, Jeff?
I think one of the interesting things that happens is tale of two seasons, basically, and you get narratives locked in because of what happens in the first part of the season, and the second part of the season might not necessarily match that. And so through the first 6 weeks, Sam LaPorta, he had 5 targets once, 4 targets once, and then never more than 3. A couple of games with 2 targets. After from week 8 forward, game 7 for the Lions, he was under 6 targets just one time over those last 11 games of the season for him. And he was between 6 to 10 targets every single week. And so just a little bit of a difference probably in that narrative locking in that early part of that season relative to him turning it around, because that second part of the season, that back end, he was still, if he would have paced that out to 17 games, he still would have been at 78 receptions, 853 yards, and 10 touchdowns, which is right where he was his rookie year. And so in my mind, the production got there. It was just that it wasn't there those first 6 weeks. And there was
That's what people
such
remember.
a freak out death spiral about those first 6 weeks, because everybody was taking him as the tight end one, consensus tight end one, that it's just locked in that narrative that I tend to believe. I don't think it's true. I think that he's shown himself to be a valuable part of this offense. I don't know why it was so quiet to begin the season last year, but it certainly turned around. And to me, the Lions said, we need you involved. We need you to be part of this offense. We're going to make a point of getting you the ball. And again, tale 2 seasons. I mean, he stacked almost all of his production in those last 10 games.
Which is kind of weird because those last 10 games are also where we saw Jameson Williams start to break out a little bit. So it's almost like that rising tide lifts all boats. Like Jameson Williams starts playing well, Sam LaPorta gets a little bit more involved. We haven't really talked about it on this show, Jeff, but how much weight are you putting in this brain drain in Detroit, where they lost the majority of their coaches? Going from Ben Johnson to John Morton seems like a pretty big decline for offensive coordinator. Are you putting a lot of weight into that? Just because in drafts that I've been doing, I'm seeing Amon St. Brown, Sam LaPorta, Jameson Williams, basically everybody not named Jahmyr Gibbs is falling pretty far in this Lions offense, further down draft boards than I would expect them to.
Well, my favorite reason to draft a player is because we've all just decided that something's bad when it might not necessarily be bad. And so I tend to believe that while Ben Johnson is an excellent coach, Dan Campbell hired Ben Johnson
Yeah.
and put Ben Johnson into that position. Dan Campbell is still the coach of the Lions, and there's still some underlying infrastructure there. I'm not panicking sky is falling. I still think the Lions are going to be a very, very good offense and one that we want for fantasy football.
Let's go on to the next tier, and this is another tier by himself. It was really hard tiering up tight ends because there are a lot of guys that are just kind of doing their own thing right now and don't really have any comps, and George Kittle is one of those going into his age 32 season, but we have seen him be just as productive as ever. He was the tight end one in fantasy scoring last year. We've seen him finish as the tight end one in multiple seasons throughout his career. He is a do-it-all tight end. He'll play in line and put his hand in the dirt and completely lay out a defender. And then in the very next play, he'll catch a seam route up the middle and gash him for 65 yards. So just a one-of-one player, but I think that we have him a little bit lower only due to the age. We both are in lockstep here, having him as our tight end 6 in these rankings.
Yeah, and last year, again, tale 2 seasons is fascinating because the first half of last year, there was so much panic about tight end being down and everybody worried about tight end. And then over the second half of the year, obviously,
Yeah.
Brock Bowers broke those records. And you mentioned it, George Kittle was tight end one. And we really lacked, we didn't have a Travis Kelce type tight end season where he was flirting with 20 points per game, but that's really the only difference between what we've seen over the last couple of years. And so that's where, again, tiering it is hard because of the age, and certainly that's a major question there. But you see Deebo Samuel's now out of that offense. Not that Deebo Samuel wasn't necessarily out of that offense already previously, but George Kittle, I think, has a great opportunity now to lead the 49ers in targets, depending on what happens with Brandon Ayuk's health, how available he is early in the season, and how involved he is early in the season. So you can make the argument that George Kittle is primed for the best season of his career at this point. But that age difference, when you're looking at a 22, 23-year-old or 24-year-old LaPorta relative to a 31-year-old George Kittle, and we talked about it pre-show, when it comes down to rankings, especially the way that I rank is, where am I going when I'm on the clock? And I'm not going in a dynasty startup. I have a real hard time pulling the trigger on a 31-year-old George Kittle relative to like a Tyler Warren or a Sam LaPorta, just because of the way that I draft. And so that's the way that it works out in my ranks. My redraft ranks would look completely different.
Yeah. And if you're sitting on a contending roster right now where you've got a strong team, and if you've got one of these guys up top that we like, Sam Laporta or a TJ Hawkinson or something like that, I mean, if you can get a first round pick in return to move off of Sam Laporta for George Kittle and get a first in return, you're locking in a guy who's probably going to be a top 3 tight end for the next 2 to 3 seasons. So I think for contenders out there, he makes for a very, very good buy, and a guy that isn't going to break the bank either. Like, nobody's asking for multiple first round picks in return for George Kittle. You can still go out in there and get him for relatively cheap. Now, we opened up the show by saying that there are these difference-making tight ends, but if you don't get those, the landscape has really changed over the last couple of years. It used to be like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, or bust, and then we have just been blessed with this influx of young, talented tight ends over the last 4 or 5 years now, and it has suddenly made it a pretty deep position. So looking at this next tier for us, Jeff, which is tier 5, which might sound low, but you got to remember Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and George Kittle were all in tiers of their own. So this tier now that we're looking at, tier 5, I think there's still a lot of very good targets here in dynasty leagues. We're looking at Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, and Tucker Kraft. Mark Andrews is the old man in the group. He's going to turn 30 this year. David Njoku turns 29 this year. So they might technically be on the wrong side of the age curve. We talk about that slow decline. So I still think that there's going to be plenty of productive years ahead for Andrews and Njoku. Kincaid, Pitts, and Tucker Kraft are all very much so on the right side of the age curve. So these are guys that I think, whether you're contending or rebuilding, all make for pretty good targets, because we're probably looking at a minimum of 4 to 5 years for each of these guys to continue producing. And when you start looking at Pitts, Kincaid, and Tucker Kraft, we could be looking at a decade plus of production there.
Yeah, I think Mark Andrews is so fascinating because he was tight end 5 last year. And I don't know that people realize he was tight end 5 last year. And
Well, he
the
had a
volume,
game-losing drop. That's what it is. I mean, the
well,
last thing we remember with Mark Andrews is him dropping a ball and ending the Ravens season, but that doesn't dictate what his entire season was.
there was that. There were trade rumors to start the season. There was the thought of that maybe they can move on and
Which I have to
insert
say, Eric
Isaiah Likely
DaCosta,
there.
the first time Eric DaCosta was asked about these Mark Andrews trade rumors publicly, I mean, they had been swirling around these Twitter streets for a few months, but Eric DaCosta shut it down immediately and talked about what an important piece Mark Andrews is to that offense.
And he's like Isaiah Likely is, so he's 25. He just turned 25. So okay, so you're stepping into the production window there. But I mean, Mark Andrews, he's 5 years older. I guess that's a lot, 5 years, but it doesn't feel like a ton. Like when you really look at it, I don't know. I think it's fascinating to me that Mark Andrews is tight end 13 on keep trade cut, and tight end 13. So like the normal league ideally is not even thinking that Mark Andrews is starting. Meanwhile, he was
It's
tight end
crazy.
5 last year. I think Mark Andrews is one of the best buys in Dynasty right now. If you're in a contending roster, you need to shore up that tight end position.
Yeah, I've got him at tight end 8. You've got him at tight end 10. So we both have him inside our tight end, our top 10 tight end. And I'd have to agree with you. Makes for a very good buy. Now, Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts are two guys that I want to focus on a little bit before we move to this next year, because both got the draft capital we want to see. Both have shown flashes. I want to hear your take on Dalton Kincaid, Jeff, because the usage last year was great. He was getting targeted. He was getting targeted deep downfield. Josh Allen, a very good passer, just had this like very weird off target tendency when he would look Dalton Kincaid's way. Like, he's throwing everything just on a dime anywhere on the field. And then you would regularly see errant throws when going in Dalton Kincaid's direction. Can you shine a little light on that and let me know what was going on last year in Buffalo?
Kincaid was playing hurt. That was part of it. So especially the second half of last year, Kincaid was hurt. He missed 3 games around like I would believe it was like week 11 to like week 14. He missed, and then he was hurt the second half of the year. There was just multiple times where Josh Allen would just be off a little bit downfield to connect with Dalton Kincaid, and so you just didn't get any of the big splash plays that worked.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was just the difference between a wide receiver, a Mac Hollins or somebody like that was in one position and Kincaid wasn't quite able to get there because of difference in athleticism, what it was, but they were just kind of off throughout the season. And Kincaid, I think it was playing through injury. I think that maybe there was some mental block there with Kincaid. I mean, you talk about Mark Andrews ending the season on a drop. I mean, Dalton
Yeah.
Kincaid had the ball right there to
In the
continue against
AFC
the Chiefs
Championship game in
in
his
the AFC
hands.
Championship game in his hands, and an NFL receiver should make that play ideally. So I think that that's part of it. Coming away from it, I'm one of the things. Joe Brady's offense doesn't necessarily target one player over the other. It's kind of everybody gets to eat a little bit. And so that's where that usage comes out of it with Kincaid. And Josh Allen had some comments after the Chiefs game where he kind of said, we've got to get Dalton Kincaid comfortable in our offense. We know that he can be a difference maker. We have to make this work. We have to get him comfortable because they used a first round pick on him. He is ideally that difference maker out of the tight end position that you see across the league. I'm not writing him off. I think some people, it seems like they're ready to punt on it, but he was more involved than what we realized. But at the same time, that didn't lead the fantasy production. He was still kind of almost, I think, tight end 20 basically is where he ended up in that range. And so you didn't get the return on investment when you were taking him. I know a lot of underdog drafts, it was kind of like that 4 or 5 turn, or
I
where
had
they would
so
grab
much
Josh
Dalton
Allen and
Kincaid
Dalton
last year.
Kincaid as the stack there, and that didn't play out. So you're kind of dealing up against that.
If you told me
They
last year in my redraft leagues that I would be dropping Dalton Kincaid for Taysom Hill come like week 7, I'd have laughed in your face, but that's what I had to do in a lot of leagues last year.
Yeah, so I just walked through the Bills game by game the other night, and it was really interesting because those 3 games that Dalton Kincaid missed, Kluge had 12 targets. It was his highest target game of the season in one of those weeks. Amari Cooper had 14 targets. That was the most that any Bills player had in one of those weeks that Kincaid was out. And then the other week that he was out was that snow game against San Francisco, where Allen only threw 17 passes. So it's the type of thing of he is so ingrained in that offense that they make a point to get him involved. And when he's gone, the tight end position doesn't really exist within their offense. And so when he was gone, then you're seeing more focused funneling towards either Khalil Shakir or Amari Cooper, or though they didn't throw the ball in one game. So you kind of that, obviously they are making him a point to get going. It's on him now. It's not one of these concerns about him being involved in the offense. He's involved. He's there. It's a high level offense with Josh Allen. I mean, the production should ideally be there, and you're betting on the youth. You're betting on the draft capital still being there. I think one of the concerns that I have on him is I don't see him after the catch in the same way that I see some of these other tight ends and some of these higher level tight ends. It doesn't seem to be that he's breaking tackles the way that you would like or making players miss those types of things. It seems to be kind of catch the ball and fall down, more in that kind of a mold.
Which TJ Hawkinson has made a living on that. Like TJ Hawkinson, we saw like a couple big breakaway runs his rookie season, but he's never really captured that magic again. He's just kind of a catch the ball, lean forward, pick up an extra yard on the way down, and that's kind of it. But that could be lucrative in fantasy football if you're in the right offense. Last guy I want to talk about here real quickly, Jeff, is Kyle Pitts. You and I both still have him ranked as a tight end 1, which I'm sure, much to the dismay of many people watching the show, how could you possibly still be holding on to faith for Kyle Pitts? But we are. 1,000 yards his rookie season, still just 24 years old, I believe, maybe going into his age 25 season, but still very, very young. We saw that injury, the knee injury that he needed surgery on, definitely lingered longer than we expected it to. But now with Michael Penix there, I keep making the comp, Jeff, and maybe I am crazy here, but when I look at what Michael Penix did in college, he had 2 big receivers that would win on the boundaries and regularly come down with contested catches in Roma Dunze and Jalen Polk. And now you look at the offense that they built in Atlanta with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I see 2 big-bodied receivers who can win on the boundary and come down with contested catches. And we've seen Penix does not shy away from throwing to a contested target there. So I am still very much so holding on to faith for Kyle Pitts, even though it has blown up in my face for 3 straight off seasons.
So I think, I mean, there's several things here. First, obviously the rookie production with Matt Ryan, great rookie production. Didn't have the touchdowns, but it was
1,000
all
yards
there.
as a rookie.
Yes. And then you had the Arthur Smith of everything. You had the injury. You had Desmond Ridder. You had whatever else they were rolling out at quarterback. There were reasons why that production didn't happen, and talk about that injury. Kyle Pitts even said as much that he almost lost the entire year where he was on the field, but he just wasn't himself because that injury just lingered. It just never really connected and got better the way that it should have. And I think that that's over now. I think last year, the biggest concern is that Kirk Cousins couldn't get the ball to him where the areas that you want to get the ball to Kyle Pitts. You want to hit the,
He could
ideally, you
not
want to
push
hit,
the ball downfield.
he couldn't push the ball downfield. He couldn't split. Ideally, with Kyle Pitts, kind of you think about it as a defense, and you think about if there's two high safeties and then there's a middle linebacker that drops on passing plays, you want to hit that window in the middle of the field with Kyle Pitts, kind of in the middle of that triangle with them. And that's what he is made to do. And Kirk Cousins couldn't hit that throw because he couldn't drive the ball. He couldn't stick it into that window. And the reason why I'm still a big believer on Kyle Pitts, you mentioned Michael Penix. Go back to that Washington game when they had to have it at the end of the game. There was that, it was about a 30-yard play, a 30-yard strike right in between those safeties, a small window throw. Penix drilled it right on the goal line to Pitts, hit him for the touchdown. They weren't able to win that game, but that was the type of throw that Kirk Cousins was not able to make, and that is the type of area that Kyle Pitts needs to be involved in to really just make defense's punishment because of his size and because of his athleticism. He is, again, similar to Dalton Kincaid, but different, but he's not one of these guys that is going to be a volume guy in terms of short plays that you allow him to create after the catch. He's just not really built that way because of his size and because of the way his athleticism kind of leans in a direction that it's more a jump ball, go get it type of a player. And you didn't have a quarterback capable of getting him there. And so I think I'm still very, very much in Kyle Pitts. It's crazy in underdog drafts. He's going tight end 18. It's wild. You can get like 15th round Kyle Pitts. And like, I'm going to be the sucker that does that every single time.
And when you're looking at tight ends who can catch a ball deep downfield, catch the ball in stride, continue moving, and rip off a big play after the catch, we have seen Kyle Pitts do that a handful of times in his career. And looking at the entire tight end landscape, what you got, Brock Bowers can do that. Trey McBride can do that. We hope Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren can do that. David Njoku will apparently rip off those big plays. But who else has that upside where they can score an 80-yard touchdown?
George Kittle.
George Kittle. Yeah, of course. George Kittle. To be honest, I don't know if he can at age 32. I mean, he's going to need to break a few tackles on the way there. Kyle Pitts has the speed where he can just pull away from the defense. George Kittle is still going to have to hand fight his way down to get to the end zone. But I'm with you. Still holding it down for Kyle Pitts. Let's move on to the next tier here, Jeff. Tier 6. And here we have a hodgepodge of young, promising guys and some declining ex-superstars. Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Cade Otton, Mason Taylor, Isaiah Likely, Travis Kelce, and Evan Ingram. So Travis Kelce and Evan Ingram at the end of this tier, guys who are definitely way on the wrong side of the age curve. Travis Kelce, I mean, what we saw last year was just bad play. I mean, he looked slow. He looked like he was in over his head. He couldn't break tackles. He was dropping balls. It was not the same Travis Kelce we've seen in years past. Evan Ingram, however, I was kind of out on Evan Ingram, but again, I'll go back to the show that I did with Coop last week. Coop is our tight end whisperer, if you will, has really made a living honing in on his tight end rankings. And he is beyond excited for Evan Ingram's role in this Broncos offense, talking about him being almost locked to be a top 5 tight end this year. So obviously age is getting up there a little bit, but if you're looking for immediate production, could you see Evan Ingram getting that this year in Denver?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, outside of Cortland Sutton, there's just questions around there. I'm a little bit more bullish on Marvin Mims than I think a lot of people are, but Evan Ingram should ideally own the middle of that field, kind of be the slot receiver almost in that offense, and it sets up very well for that.
I don't really want to compare him to a Jimmy Graham or one of the other tight ends that's been in a Sean Payton offense. He's not. But could you say he's almost like a Marquez Colston, like a guy who could work out of the slot and just eat slant routes? Maybe even Michael Thomas light, if you will. I think you can compare him to some of these big, physical, low ADOT receivers that have been in Sean Payton's offense more than you can compare him to Jimmy Graham.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think it's I don't know that he's still there, I guess maybe is the way that I view it. I think Cortland Sutton's kind of has that role locked down as the big guy that you want to utilize on those slants and rely on Sutton in that area. I mean, it's certainly in play. It would not surprise me to see Evan Ingram return a top 5 tight end season. I think people are maybe a little bit aggressive on Evan Ingram at this point in time, just because of some of the the Joker talk and all those types
Yeah,
of
yeah.
things.
He
You know,
did tweet a picture of a Joker
you
after
know,
getting
and
signed.
it's one of those that Evan Ingram, I feel like, is when everybody's in on him, he's going to disappoint you, and then when nobody's in on him,
Yes.
that's when you get like the great season. So
So let's talk about Pat Fryermuth here because there's a little bit of a disparity here. And Pat Fryermuth was one of those guys that I wanted to move up in my rankings because we saw some flashes as a rookie. We saw some flashes last year as well. But like I said, the tight end landscape suddenly became pretty I don't want to say loaded, but a lot deeper than it has been because of this influx of young talent. And Pat Fryermuth is one of those guys, one of the young, talented tight ends that came into the league, still way on the right side of the age curve. And I think that when you start looking at some of the buzzier names out there, it just makes Pat Fryermuth one of the best buys in Dynasty right now.
I think so too. And it really breaking it down, he should be second in the team in targets and
Yep,
unquestionably second in the team in targets. And really, for tight ends, I
that's what
want
you
a
want.
player that's going to be in the top two of the target tree. And I think that Pat Fryermuth sits right there, and he absolutely should be. He was tight end 10 last year. That production is it's not as exciting as the high end. And there were moments where people thought maybe he would get to there based upon his youth and early production. And he never quite did get there. And so it's kind of like that post hype sleeper now at this point. But I mean, I'm operating as if Aaron Rodgers is going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. Maybe he's
Yep.
not going to be, but that's kind of where my mind is on this offense. And so I'm a little bit more bullish on the Steelers in general than if Mason Rudolph or Will Howard is the week one starting quarterback. But I think that Fryermuth, you break it down and you're looking for players that are going to be top two on their team in targets.
And something else I want to point out about this tier, Jeff, and I guess one of these guys is in the tier above, but David Njoku, Jonnu Smith, Evan Ingram, some of the names that we've been talking about recently are exactly why we're still holding it down for Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid and these younger guys, because all of these guys, Jonnu Smith, who we haven't talked about, we'll talk about him a little bit, but Jonnu Smith was a guy who didn't break out until he was 29 years old. Evan Ingram didn't break out until he was 28 years old. David Njoku didn't break out until he was 27 years old. So when you look at some of these younger guys like Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid and say, well, the production hasn't really been there, it could still come. Their careers are not over as 24, 25-year-old tight ends. We see that the learning curve for tight end is a lot longer than it is for other positions, especially for a guy like Dalton Kincaid, who, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, he didn't even start playing football till he was like a sophomore in college, right?
He was old. He was later to the game. I don't exactly remember the story, but I do know that he hasn't played a ton of tight end.
Yeah, I think there was something like his rookie season was like his third year of playing organized football or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but definitely want to exercise patience with some of these young tight ends. Is there anybody else in this tier you'd like to talk about specifically, Jeff? We touched on Fryermuth, we touched on Jonnu Smith, Evan Ingram, and Travis Kelsey. Isaiah Likely, Mason Taylor, and Cade Otton are the other three in this tier. Would you like to talk about any of those three guys before we move on to the last one?
I mean, briefly on Mason Taylor, he's athletic. He was an early second round pick. He should be number two on his team in targets, ideally. But I think the Cade Otton is fascinating to me because it's like completely forgotten about. He's 25, 26 years old, like right in that prime age. He missed the last 3 weeks of the season. Before he went out, he was tight end 8 on the season. And when you saw Chris Godwin miss time, Cade Otton was heavily involved
He
within
was
that
basically
offense.
playing Chris Godwin's role. He was just
Yes.
lining up in the slot and getting those easy targets.
Yes, and it just feels like just a completely forgotten about player. I think he's going off the board. Again, we're mixing best ball into dynasty, but off the board as like tight end like 25 or something like that. You can get him in like the 17th round of underdog. It's just completely forgotten about because obviously we see them add Emeka Ibuka. We know they still have the other two receivers. We like Jalen McMillan, and it's for whatever reason, Cade Otton is just out of sight, out of mind. Completely forget about him. I think this is
I
another
think you
guy that
said the reason why, Jeff. You just kind of glanced over it, but Emeka Egbuka. I think that's why people are out on Cade Otton because last year when Chris Godwin got hurt, they had to go to Cade Otton as that slot receiver. Now with Emeka Egbuka there, now we need two injuries for Otton to get back into that role. And he isn't a guy that has the pedigree that we like to see. You know, he wasn't a first round pick. He wasn't even a day 2 pick. Like this guy fell to round 4 in the NFL draft. And we saw his production come over a pretty small window when Chris Godwin got hurt. Now I think the Emeka Egbuka draft pick insulates them from a Chris Godwin injury, which just makes Kate Otton's path to getting to that role we saw last year a lot more arduous.
Yeah, I think he's going to be on the field most every snap, and I think the Buccaneers' offense is going to be good. And I don't, I just think it's a forgotten about player that if you're looking for to augment your dynasty tight end or just a player that you can fill in, just kind of he's a forgotten about player again. That's right in the prime of his career in a good offense.
For this final tier, Jeff, we're not going to talk about every single guy here because we have, it looks like 12 or 13 guys in this tier, but I'm going to list them off and we can handpick a few that we want to discuss here. So, final tier here, the guy that we have the biggest disparity on. Actually, there's two guys that we have a pretty big disparity on in this tier, but Terrence Ferguson, I've got him at tight end 13. You have him at tight end 23. After that, we've got Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson, Brenton Strange, Elijah Arroyo, Harold Fannin, Chigakonkwo, Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry, Jatavian Sanders, Theo Johnson, Michael Mayer, Ben Sinnott, Zach Ertz, and Dalton Schultz. So really just a island of misfit toys here, a little bit of everything. You've got some promising rookies. You've got Zach Ertz just clinging on to the rest of his NFL career while still being productive in this Washington offense. Don't get me wrong, but it just got a mix of everything here. Are there any guys you'd like to talk about specifically? The two guys that we have the biggest disparity on, Jeff, are Ben Sinnott and Terrence Ferguson, with me significantly higher on both of them. But then you look at some other guys that you're a little bit higher on. Who would you like to talk about in this tier?
We can talk about those two players, and I think that I don't know. I mean, it was surprising to see Ben Sinnott be uninvolved to the level that he was uninvolved, and I think that that maybe shades why I'm a little bit lower on Terrence Ferguson, and it's kind of I've got Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren probably ahead of consensus on the one end, but they went top 15 in the draft. Meanwhile, day two tight ends can be you've got some hits and you've got some complete misses. And so I think that because that position is so complicated, because there are some development stages that need to occur that need to get players onto the field, that those are reasons why I'm a little bit lower on a Ferguson or Sinnott not being involved. Brenton Strange is the type of player that maybe illustrates this a little bit, because I know Brenton Strange coming off his rookie year, second round pick, you couldn't even give him away in Dynasty. Like nobody wanted him at all. And then last year, Evan Ingram missed some weeks and Brenton Strange came in and was pretty involved. And then
I know he's
obviously
like
this year,
everybody's favorite buzzy sleeper.
now he's everybody's favorite buzzy sleeper. And so that's where maybe I'm a little bit more cautious on some of these players just because of what I've seen the market kind of react to this. And I'd love to see Terrence Ferguson lock down that Rams tight end job and be the slot receiver within that offense, replace some of Cooper Kupp's production, and allow kind of the other players around him, Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, to do what they do. And that would be great. And I would happy to be wrong in this situation. But it's also, we've seen a lot of tight ends kind of move through there with the Rams and none of it really worked. I mean, Tyler Higbee had a great receiving profile when he first came into the league, and it was one of those that you just never really got that high end production that you were hoping to see. Gerald
You want
Everett's
to talk
another
about
one of
Evan
those
Ingram,
guys.
a guy that you're always like starting when you shouldn't be and benching when you shouldn't be. I feel like that was always the story with Tyler Higbee. Like three
Yes.
touchdowns on your bench and then one catch for 11 yards when he's in your starting lineup.
Yes. Yes. And it's, I mean, Zach Ertz played really, really well. To me, I don't think there's any reason why Ben Sinnott should have been like a complete zero his first year. And so that's
And
where
that,
just some concerns there.
sorry, just bumped into my mic for anybody that's going to hear that on the audio side. But I have definitely thought about the Trey McBride, Ben Sinnott comps. You know, the rookie season under Cliff Kingsbury, Zach Ertz is in the picture, and it's really easy to dream up the year two breakout. But Jeff, you look at what Trey McBride did as a rookie, and you look at what Ben Sinnott did as a rookie, and they aren't even remotely comparable. I mean, Trey McBride had 3 games as a rookie where he outperformed Ben Sinnott's entire season-long production. Ben Sinnott last year, 26.7% of the offensive snaps, compared to Trey McBride as a rookie who saw over 50% of these snaps. 39 targets and 29 catches for Trey McBride as a rookie, 5 targets and 5 catches for Ben Sinnott. So easy to talk about the narrative. What was that, Jeff?
Were you at Trey McBride's pro day? I feel like you were.
I was.
Like,
I was. Yeah, I
yes.
got to hand clock his 40 time out on the
Yeah.
practice field and then interview him after. Pretty cool opportunity. Yeah.
But when he was at Colorado State, he was their entire offense. They
Oh
just
yeah.
like he was everything, and you saw that. Whereas Ben Sinnott was not that for Kansas State. You saw some fun plays, and he definitely beasted some guys in the Big 12 there, but it just wasn't the same level of like this is a go-to receiver type of a player. So I hear those comps, and certainly I want to buy in too. I want Ben Sinnott to succeed. I've probably got him hanging out in some places, but
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit too aggressive the way he was treated last offseason.
They also did bring back John Bates too. Not only did they sign Zach
Yes.
Ertz, but they also brought back John Bates, who caught some touchdowns last year, and so it might be
He's
a
one of the
couple of
very best
years,
blocking tight ends in the league. So,
which we're seeing a lot of teams start to skew in that direction. I mean, we just saw the Bears do it by drafting Colson Loveland, pairing him up with Cole Kmet. We saw the success last year with Sam LaPorta and Brock Wright in Detroit. Now we see Zach Ertz and John Bates. It seems like a lot of teams are skewing in that direction. We saw it with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer, and I think again I talked about how we were going to talk about Mayer or about Brock Bowers a little bit later in the show, kind of glossed over it, but I think a lot of people have used the tight ends that are on the depth chart in Indianapolis as reason to knock Tyler Warren. And they're like, well, Jelani Woods is there and Mo Alley Cox is there. But I see Mo Alley Cox very much so as the guy who's going to be playing inline tight end, where they can move Tyler Warren all over the formation as a Zach Ertz, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, whatever you want to cop him to. We see a lot of teams do this two tight end formation now where they have their move guy and they have their inline guy. Anybody else in this tier that jumps out to you, Jeff? Chigakonkwo is an interesting name. I think the Jonnu Smith comps are very obvious. A hyper athletic guy that plays for the Titans, but we did see some promise. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you know off the top of your head. I think Chigakonkwo had the longest touchdown any tight end scored last year, right?
yeah, the game against Houston, I think he might have, but there was a window during the last month of the season or so where he was just getting targeted like crazy, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it was maybe some desperation, maybe some just none of the other options working, but very much in a similar vein to Jonnu Smith, where we saw the Nick Westbrook Akine breakout season kind of last year, where he just would catch a touchdown every single week, and you got Calvin Ridley, and Okonkwo kind of was serving as the default slot receiver within that offense, and so. I'm still high on Okonkwo. I'm a little bit concerned because they drafted Gunnar Helm in the fourth
Yeah.
round, so that adds into it. I think Josh Wiley is not a complete zero. I think Josh Wiley's he was injured last year. He's the type of player that can get some reps too and fit into there, and so that's
But
where
isn't
there's
isn't
maybe
Gunnar
a little
Helm
bit of concern.
Gunnar Helm is a lot more of that traditional tight end, though, like we were saying,
Yes,
right? Like he would be
yes,
the inline guy, where
yes.
Chigakonkwo could be the move guy, the guy that could play out of the
And
slot, the
so
guy
would
that can get
Josh
touches out of
Wiley.
the backfield.
Yep, yep. I agree.
All right, well, I think that'll do it. Unless there's anybody else that you wanted to talk about in this tier, Harold Fannin is maybe a guy we can discuss. We both have him outside of our top 24. I've got him at tight end 25. You've got him at tight end 27. Seems like the biggest inhibitor for Harold Fannin. Well, he's got a few: the athleticism, the draft capital, and David Njoku being ahead of him. So, you think that we're pretty sound? You're okay keeping him a little bit lower in our rankings than where other people have him.
Yeah, I am. I think the biggest thing, it's going to be interesting to see because obviously we saw the Jonnu Smith breakout. We know that this is a copycat league, and how many teams get involved in having that type of a player like Jonnu Smith. If that happens in several teams, again, 12 tight ends are starting in your league. And it's a running joke in fantasy football that tight end is deep, and it never ends up being deep. But there's a chance. It doesn't take that many players to fill out 12, especially when you're feeling really, really good about your top 6 or 7 when you're kind of in those rankings right now. And so I think that that's going to be an interesting thing to see because I think you can make a really, really good argument for late round tight end this year relative to if you're not going to get a Brock Bowers or a Trey McBride.
And again, it wouldn't be a tight end show if we didn't shout out our friend Andrew Cooper 3 times, but I will shout him out a third time. He talks about the yin yang tight end strategy, and that's not something that you could just use in redraft. You can use that in your dynasty leagues as well, where you wait on tight end and you get one of those safe, boring veterans, Zach Ertz, a Dallas Goddard, somebody like that, and then you pair him up with one of these upside guys, a Chigakonkwo or a Kyle Pitts or a Brenton Strange or a Terrence Ferguson, and then that way you've got the floor of that safe, boring veteran in. And then you've also got these lotto tickets that could end up being the David Njoku age 27 breakout or whatever it may be. So a good strategy, if you don't get one of those creme de la creme guys up top, is just to double, maybe even triple tap tight ends later in your startup, just to give you more opportunities to find that breakout player. Well, that'll do it for tight ends, Jeff. We are coming back on Thursday with an episode on quarterbacks, and then next week we'll be doing running backs and wide receivers. I want to thank y'all for tuning in, and we will see you on Thursday.